There we are, and so welcome back everyone. We are now in week 9 of these fantastic Joint School live videos, and I'm so thrilled to hear from people who found them helpful and people who are sending in questions for us to tackle and suggestions. We've had quite a few that asked us to look on topics around hip replacement and what it's like to have a hip replacement when you're a bit younger, so we've covered some of those points. And while I was researching that, I read a really interesting article by a physiotherapist named Louise Grant, who was reflecting on her recent experience of having a hip replacement some 7 months ago. And so I'm thrilled that Louise is now joining us. So Louise Grant, who's a co-founder of PhysioCure, which is based in Leeds. And so she's an experienced physiotherapist with well over 20 years of working as a physiotherapist, very much with orthopedic patients before and after hip and knee replacements. And now she has a very personal experience of having gone through a hip replacement herself. So we'll be diving into this, and we have some really interesting questions to dig into, and also some workouts, some gentle exercises that Louise found helpful before and after surgery. So welcome, Louise.
Hi Axel, thanks for inviting me. It's really exciting, but let's first of all say it's very daunting because we just chatted earlier. I've not been to the hairdresser, but it's very brave of me. So.
Yeah, it is very brave of you. I certainly haven't either. I think you're looking fantastic, and you know, as ever, it's the guests really that carry these sessions, and I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be great. So, and thank you for joining us. And also, word out there to everyone who's using the app. You know, of course, with the exercises, you can use the app to film and add your own exercise videos. So if you find some of the stuff that we cover here today with Louise useful, then you can, you could create your own exercise plan to match the advice that you're given from your physiotherapist. And of course, I wear the safety hat, so also worth saying that the exercises that we cover here and the topics we cover and what we're discussing, none of it is medical advice, and it may not be relevant for you personally. So before you start any new exercises or any new workouts, anything like that, always check it with a physiotherapist who knows you. And indeed, you'll be able to check in with Louise herself or her team through the PhysioCure website, and details for that will be below this video. So as ever, these videos are very much some general pointers, some general guidelines, but really what you need is some face-to-face guided physiotherapy with a physiotherapist. So that can be done in person soon, we hope, but also virtually. Super. Is there anything else you'd like to sort of add before we dive into a couple of questions about your recent experience?
Right. Well, I think I've obviously been locked down at the moment. The plus side is I've been able to do a bit more to do with my rehab, because I went back to work at 3 months and my hip was still a bit swollen, still a bit weak. And to be honest, I was really finding it quite hard work standing all day. So although then it's not great that my clinic is shut, the positive, I've been able to work more on my rehab and recovery. So that's really good. So I've always got to look at the positive story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we will certainly dig into exactly what kind of steps you've been taking in terms of your rehab and recovery. But let's move sort of somewhat more chronologically. So if we go back to the beginning. So before you've had your own hip replacement, you've been looking after people in this situation for quite some time. Can you tell us about the typical age and the kind of, if there is a typical patient that has a hip replacement in your experience?
Well, first of all, I worked for about 8 years in the NHS before setting up a practice. So I've been a physio a long time. It's nearly 30 years coming up to it. When I was a young junior physio, my mum had a hip replacement when she was 50 and she's now 74. And I can remember quite clearly being sort of interested in why mum needed a hip replacement at a young age, and also thinking about the lifespan of that hip. And mum's got an old Charnley in, and it's still doing.
Wow, yeah.
She plays badminton.
That's a real piece of history.
So she's doing really well, and so it got me back then 20 odd years ago interested in hip patients. So we see patients from their 20s, and some of them have maybe had a previous hip arthroscopy, some of them have had a peri-acetabular osteotomy, for some of them it can be then their first hip surgery. So 20s upwards, and various factors as to why that might be. Sometimes it's to do with the hip architecture, the bony situation of the hip, which can cause some early arthritic changes, or sometimes it could be trauma. So various things, but we see them right the way in different ages.
So I guess it really covering the full range from someone like Dr. Zach Nathan, who I spoke with last week, who was in his late 20s and maybe even a bit younger than that, and then to the sort of the other end of the spectrum, and perhaps people who are at the age of your mother is now.
Yes, and some people come for pre-op help, so they come to help to learn what they can do while they may be on a waiting list for surgery, just to see what they can be doing just to help themselves, what exercises they can do, and then post-op we do things like hydrotherapy, Pilates, some hands-on physio, also things we can do to help whatever that patient really needs, and it's to do with the patient, it's their goal, it's taken away, it's the patient's personal goal.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's so important that things are tailored to each individual's situation, circumstances, and goals that are meaningful for that individual. But hopefully we'll also touch on some general things that may be helpful for the many people out there who are now facing an uncertain or prolonged wait for their hip replacement.
Yeah, definitely.
And so can you tell us a little bit, Louise, about what led up to you being booked in for hip replacement and that process?
Yeah, so 9 years ago I had a hip arthroscopy after I fell on some ice and injured my hip, and they found that I got a certain bony architecture called coxa profunda, which is a very deep hip, and because it's very deep it's very stiff, so often that can have early wear patterns. So when I had the arthroscopy, they thought that possibly I might not bounce back from it, but I did, and 9 years, I've had some good years with it, and then unfortunately last year around this time I fell, just wobbled over, broke my elbow, tore the wrist cartilage, fell onto the hip that was doing well, and it didn't bounce back from the fall, and so went to see my colleague who's a surgeon, and we looked at the x-rays and he said, it's time now. Yes, it's not going to bounce back from the fall, and a bony cyst had gone inside the hip, and I was struggling to walk. I was having to use a stick. I went to I was due to speak at a hip conference in Madrid in October, so I went along to that. And one thing I'd say is that I really thought about cancelling it, because I was walking with a stick, and I thought I can't do the airport. But then I rung up the airport, explained, and they arranged me to have wheelchair assistance. So I arrived at Madrid, being pushed in a wheelchair, and the other hip surgeons were arriving from London, and I was so embarrassed because they saw me in a wheelchair. They were saying, oh. And I said, my hip's gone. So then I had my operation when I got back in November with John Conroy, who works at the Nuffield in Leeds, and he used the robot hip with me. The robot doesn't do it, the robot is guiding him to do this.
No, that's important. And indeed, there's no reason to be embarrassed about needing a wheelchair, because it enabled you to attend that conference despite the discomfort and pain that you're experiencing.
I would recommend it because I was embarrassed. I just thought, I'm still embarrassed asking for it, but actually it meant that I could go and do something. So if someone's in pain, don't try and struggle along. If there is something there that can help you, and use it, and try not to be embarrassed, and don't be embarrassed about using a stick as well.
And perhaps there's a good tip in there as well for when eventually we can get back to using more public transport and traveling and flying and that kind of thing, of actually contacting the airline and so on to see what possibilities there are for extra support.
Definitely.
But so the surgeon who performed your hip replacement, you've been working with him for some time as well before?
Yeah, about 10 years. He does hip arthroscopies. He's a friend of Tim Bard's.
Oh, right, okay.
Replacements, and quite particularly with younger people as well.
Yeah,
And yeah, so about 10 years, and he was quite nervous. No, he wasn't nervous. Sorry, his colleagues were nervous for him. His colleagues were joking to him that, was he nervous about operating on me? Because if then it didn't go to plan, and he said, "It'll be ridiculous. Of course it will go to plan, and I'm just going to do my best job." So he did, and what was interesting, Axel, is when I was under sedation, I just thought I was in a nice sleep, and I wasn't aware of anything apart from maybe someone lifting up the cover at times saying, "Are you okay?" But after the operation, when he came to speak to me, I said, "I've got a list of questions," and he said, "Well, you've already asked me them all in theatre." I remember talking, he said, "You did, you asked me questions throughout," and it's because I've watched so many surgeries. I was wanting to know how, certain things about the operation, and him, I was asking him throughout the whole situation. He got grilled.
And I guess then just to clarify that, it sounds like you had a sort of a spinal anesthetic, perhaps with a little bit of some kind of sedation or something to kind of soothe and make you a bit sleepy.
Yeah, so the spinal, and it went really well. I was really comfortable with it. Yeah.
Good stuff. And so that experience then, and the questions that you were so keen to ask, has it shaped how you now think about someone who walks into your clinic either before or after a hip replacement?
I can totally understand how, even though I needed it doing, I kept thinking, "Oh, but I really don't want surgery." And I can understand that why patients say that, because it's just something none of us really want to do. And you worry then, how will it affect my family? Could it affect my job? Will I be able to do things again? And it's then things that just go over in your mind, and that's why, I can understand why some patients maybe feel quite anxious about it. And everyone's different. Some people take it in the stride, but it's made me appreciate that. And then also, a bit like Zach, I had a rough 6 weeks afterwards. I didn't react very well to the pain medications. I had constipation and all sorts of things, and my legs swelled up quite a lot as well, and was bruised. And I think it's being patient with yourself and saying, "Not forever. Yeah, it feels not great now, but then it's short-lived." And now it's a bit like for women having a baby, you forget about it, and and it's just that part and parcel of having surgery, and we all react different to it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, let's definitely make a note so that we don't forget to get back to the steps that you took to help manage both constipation and the swelling. But before that, I'd like to ask, in terms of, so you must have had quite a clear picture or expectation of what, both the immediate and sort of the onward recovery after surgery was going to be like. How closely did sort of the real experience match up to what you thought it would be like?
The movement was better of the hip than I thought it would be, because I was quite pleased about how much range I got, because for so long before the surgery I couldn't put my shoe and sock on. So I was feeling quite excited. I thought, "Oh, I can feel I'm going to be able to do that again." So that was good. But then I think the swelling, it's still a bit swollen. That's been sort of the thing that I thought maybe wouldn't have been quite as swollen, but maybe, I wasn't being realistic, because I'm on the older side, so maybe my circulation is not as good as someone younger.
Well, age is just a number.
I know, yes, but yes.
But yeah.
So let me think what else. I think I noticed as well that patients who had the operation, I was really touched by how they sort of sent me lots of messages and cards, giving me encouragement, saying, it'll be worth it, you'll be able to do so much more. And the kindness of people, yeah, just it's something that I really sort of reflected on in my recovery.
No, that's nice. That's nice, and I think we've seen a lot about a lot of evidence for the really positive benefit that having a bit of a community feel can have, and sort of questions, in the forums online, be it in a Facebook group or and kind of I guess through these videos as well, where people might send in a question and often I'm getting emails back saying, it was really great that you asked it of my question, which of course is a question that many people probably will have, right? And you're sort of feeding into the to the very real fact that there's a lot of people in this situation, and while of course everyone's experience is different and everyone will have their own experience and recover in their own way, there are many thousands of people there in a similar situation who'll be walking a similar path to you, and it's just a matter of hopefully learning from someone who's a little bit further down the line perhaps might help people who are now sort of getting ready for that hip replacement.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, it's all about helping each other, and yeah, and just learning off each other as well. Even though I go on my hip conferences, very much I learn from my patients just as much. It's about listening to your patients and learning from them, and never stop learning. Even if I've been a physio for 30 years, I never think that I know it all. I'm always going on conferences, courses, because there's always something new to learn, and it's just being open to things.
Yeah, and the environment changes as well. Like with coronavirus and this kind of these new circumstances, a lot of the this kind of the rule book has changed a little bit around different considerations both before and after surgery.
Yes.
Yeah. So on that note, Louise, what in general terms, of course, again, this is not medical advice and it's not individualized as such, but are there any sort of top tips that you would want to highlight to people both before and after hip replacement?
Okay, so before, I'm a big fan of pre-operative physio. So it's about preparing yourself, knowing what's around the corner. So whether that be preparing your home, and I think you can obviously get raised toilet seats and sock aids. Now they're not just for after. If you've got a sore, painful hip, you could maybe use them before to just keep your pain levels down. Because if you're then struggling to get your sock on, making that hip sore, then it can, just fuel the pain cycle. So use those things before surgery if they're helpful. Then think about then exercises just to keep yourself strong and mobile as well. I found going in the pool, obviously we can't at the moment, really helpful because I could use the buoyancy of the water, and I would then do things like stretches, gentle movements, not necessarily swimming because the breaststroke movement would irritate my hip. Although if I used a float and then laid on my front and then just kicked my legs, then I could manage that without causing any pain. But there's lots of things that you can just do in the walking up and down in the pool, for example, and that can feel quite nice. And then just really sort of basic care, making sure that you're kind to yourself. Some people find things like relaxation tapes and helping calm anxiety down helpful as well, and talking to people about how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Post-op, my number one thing is afternoon naps. And I often say to my patients, make sure you have an afternoon nap, and they're like, oh no, don't do that. You'll benefit from it, because just in recovery, I think sometimes your body's had all these chemicals from the surgery, and it's had then the trauma from the surgery, and sleep, and it's a bit disturbed often, first of all, because you can't maybe get as comfortable. So sleeping sort of in the afternoon after lunch can do you the world of good. Also looking after your bowel health. So whatever works for you, prunes, orange juice, or whether you need to take a medicine for it. But if you can try and do it with diet, that's great. But be aware that the medications and the lack of you being able to move around makes things a bit sluggish, which then isn't pleasant. When you've already got a sore hip, to have that to cope with, it's not great. So really be aware of getting on top of that, drinking plenty of fluid as well.
Yeah.
Things that I found helpful as well, when I was able to, the physios at my clinic were doing a bit of massage on my leg, and on my back because they felt quite sore and swollen, and that really helped me. And then some of our patients use electrotherapy type devices, home ones like TENS machines, or sometimes muscle stimulator machines, which sometimes these things you think, do they work? But then after trying them myself, I found it can do, especially if you're in pain. Sometimes these sorts of things can just help take the pain down a few notches. So there's lots of different things that'll work for some people, but not for all.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Knowledge of that these things are out there.
Yeah.
One of my friends bought me a gratitude diary, which I looked at it and she said, I know you're really positive, but I've just got you this. And I did write in it and just thought, I'm grateful that I can stand up today and walk with my crutches to the toilet. And it was simple. Yeah. And it's trying not to then think, putting the goalpost too far ahead. Try and think of then that just simple things that you're doing, just getting up and about, maybe having a shower, and just being pleased that you're able to do that, rather than thinking, oh no, I can't run yet and it's only a week post-op. It's being realistic in your goal setting, because otherwise it can affect you mentally if you're thinking too far ahead. Just think, here and now, and just then try and think of what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That I think that's a really, really valid point on sort of that positive mindset, and I think increasingly in recent years we're starting to recognize how that can be really, really beneficial, and that there are sort of tools and techniques to try to tap into that.
Yeah. Okay. It's
good. Did you have another point to add?
I was just going to say, one thing I was going to say, because one thing that as a physio, I thought, what will my hip feel like after the op? And I thought, will it feel artificial? And I asked all my patients, what does it feel like? Does it feel like a false hip? And they went, no, not really. So when I stood up for the first time, it felt solid, it felt trustworthy. And now, it feels like it does actually feel like my own hip, which is really strange. The thing that I can feel is the muscles still recovering. And obviously they've been cut through and things like that.
Yeah.
Recovery I can feel, but the actual hip, it's really strange because it just feels like my hip, but a better version of my hip.
Yeah.
It's a pleasant surprise. It's like thinking, oh, this is good. It's really sort of, encouraging.
Yeah. It's interesting, really, how the sort of the mind and the body can learn to accept this new hip as your own, really. And I think with that process, there's some people can experience this feeling of one leg being longer than the other, which unfortunately can happen in some cases. But often that's part of the sort of the body getting used to this new hip that might be put back into an anatomical position that has been changed through wear and tear.
It's sometimes someone's got then very tight hip flexors due to struggling with the hip before surgery, so then they will be sort of affected where they're having to sort of bend a lot of that hip, and then when that hip's then being replaced, then obviously they're going to experience that new sort of lengthening. It'll be gradual, and then they'll have to then learn that new posture and body position, and being in a compensatory position before. And we do see some cases where people have struggled on a long time and sometimes left it, in my opinion, a bit too long before they've gone to get help, and they're bent over double, chair shaped, and where then they've been so scared, and then when they've had it done, come in to see me and say, oh, I wish I'd had it done it sooner, because it's not as bad as I thought. And but obviously it has to be the patient's decision. Nobody can ever tell them to have surgery. They can only advise, and the surgeon we work with, he just says what he can do to help, but he doesn't then enforce them to have a hip replacement.
No, of course not. It's and that's and perhaps even more important now in the context of coronavirus, that these decisions are shared decisions that each individual will make with their surgeon, and indeed also as they go on to plan rehabilitation, that's something that you'll do with your physiotherapist and get that guided input for each step of the way. And in terms of your recovery, just before we dive into some exercises, you went through a really wonderful list of some tips there, and more specifically, are there any sort of items or sort of pieces of kit that you found really helpful in your recovery that people should maybe consider having around the house?
Like these things, like the sock aid, you mean, or do you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I found then the grabber stick very useful because I could then use it to get dressed and undress myself, and this sock aid, the toilet seat. Now, even my surgeons and what's called a no restrictions hip replacement surgeon. So that means then some surgeons say they're very fixed to it. For 6 weeks, you've got to
With
stick
the precautions, yeah.
precautions. But then now some surgeons that say there's no precautions. So there's a bit of a mixture out there, and it can be confusing for the patients to think, well, right, mine's different to that one. What I'd always say to patients, it's a good idea to be sensible, and that you'll find that sometimes anyway, because of the swelling, you can't bend past 90 anyway, and I couldn't. So I, even though they didn't issue me with a toilet seat, I couldn't post-op bend to the toilet. I needed one and I couldn't get my shoe or my sock. So I needed those gadgets, and I find most patients find it better because they feel like they can do things a bit more easier. But everyone's a bit different, and it's about listening to your surgeon's advice and realizing that there might be slight differences whichever surgeon that you go with.
Yeah, no, wonderful. I think that's really important to highlight that slight mixture that is out there between some surgeons advising precautions and some not using that. And of course, the key thing there is that you follow the advice from your surgeon and what you have been told. There's different considerations, the different reasons why that may be the right thing for you to do. So before we go through some exercises, just sort of, we've talked a bit about your experience before surgery and your recovery, but how are things now? So 7 months on, are you pretty much where you thought you would be, and if so, what's different?
Well, like I think I said earlier, I'm glad that I've been able to have more time doing my rehab because I've been able to concentrate on things, because remember, the hip's multi-directional. We go forwards, backwards, to the side, we rotate. So it's about then covering all those muscle groups to make sure our hip's properly strong. And what I found was, as I got to 30 minutes of walking, my opposite knee started hurting. So I had to troubleshoot that a bit. And what was happening is my good leg was probably leading me a bit more than my operated leg. So it was overworking. So I've had to really concentrating on driving through more with my operated leg. And because it's very easy to compensate a bit more with the other. And now I've then sort of balanced myself out a bit. The knee pain on the other side has got better. So for me, it's about troubleshooting at the moment, because in the first so many months, when you're only doing a limited amount of activity or exercise, you maybe don't feel sort of other things. But as you're starting to get more active, it might be that you have a few sort of things that need troubleshooting, and just want to make sure that you're balanced and all the muscles are working as they should do. And I personally have got a bit to go. So when you see me do the exercises, I am still recovering, so I might be a bit wobbly on one side, but then it's good because I'm showing you my real patient. I'm also then, before surgery, because I was inactive, I put a bit of weight on. After surgery, you can't sort of suddenly get too active, so I've still got a bit of weight to lose. So again, I'm not like a gym instructor telling you what to do. I've got a little bit of weight and a bit of a swollen hip, so it's all real life drama here.
No, indeed.
Yeah, so I'm just working through things and just progressing through things. And I look at recovery as sometimes being over a year, because it's good to take it. It's better be like the tortoise and the hare and just do what we call a slow cooking approach of then have gradual, and then you're sort of moving at a sensible pace. But of course, you'll see people on the internet. Some people are out sort of climbing mountains, and one thing I'd say to patients is don't compare yourself to other people. Your journey is your own journey. It's not a race, it's not a competition. It's about just getting you your best outcome for you individually.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mentioned about the walking, that was really interesting. So you've gradually built up to walking a sort of solid half hour. and so that's sort of been gradual over the 7 months. How have you, how do you know, how have you sort of measured that increase? How, like, have there been some days where you feel that you've done too much, or is it sort of following a plan for a certain amount to walk? Or
I was trying to do my Apple Watch. So many steps, but yeah. I was really sort of going on how I felt, because you will have some days where you don't feel as good as others, and you need to listen to your body. So I was just gradually increasing it, and just trying to then think about my quality of walking rather than the timing or the quantity of it. So I was thinking about how I was walking, because sometimes we see patients who might tell us they're walking a lot, but then they're walking with a limp, and then, you know, that's not great. We need to think about the quality as well.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much again, Louise. This I think you're covering some really helpful points. I think some really useful tips. And is there anything else you'd want to say before you sort of guide us through some gentle exercises?
I just have a little look at my list. National speaker, so I do have to make notes.
Hey, that's quite all right.
Right, I think we got scar massage. That's the only thing I've maybe not mentioned. I found that useful, because and doing that, obviously the scar has to properly heal. You don't want to do it early, but then once that's healed, then massaging around the scar to be able to then, it helps the tissue because it gets quite adherent. So it's about improving blood flow, but just improving the elasticity of the tissue. So I feel it's really helpful in recovery, and it's something you can do yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good point, but also important to probably best to wait until you have the go ahead from your surgeon that the wound has been reviewed, everything's fully healed and nice and dry, and then scar tissue massage can begin.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Did you use anything in particular as like a lotion or oil with scar tissue massage, or is it more just the massage?
Well, I don't know. Can we mention products? Because I'm not obviously
advertising. Well, we're certainly not sponsored by any products. I don't know if we need to name the exact products, but whether it's sort of like a.
It was an oil meant for scar massage.
Okay. Yeah.
But you can use non-scented lotions. So you could use things that are non-scented, non-perfumed. Mini cream, for example. But products out there for scar, and that you can use them on there. So I think the most important thing is it's something that doesn't irritate the scar, and it's a mechanical effort of you massaging rather than what you're putting on it. With scars as well, I would just say that there's been a couple of patients who have been in the sun a bit too early, and then the scar's gone darker. So I've sort of heard out there, sort of, it's good maybe in the first year not to expose your scar to sunshine if you don't want it to be darkened, that is, because I think you can be quite vulnerable. So just be aware and be careful of UV in that first year with your scar, because it can then darken it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, I think. And anything else on the list before I hand over the screen to you for the exercises?
Oh, right, sorry, one more thing about scars. Robot hip surgery, you get 2 scars. So you get, I'm not pulling my shorts down, don't worry. One up here, and then placement scar here. So the one up here is where the robot fixes to your pelvis. So one thing that I had with the robot hip scar is that I had quite a lot of nerve pain afterwards, because this machine has to fix onto the pelvis. So the actual replacement scar wasn't too bad, but the robot scar was quite numb, and I did get quite a lot of soreness down the leg. My outside of my leg was very numb for quite a while, and so that was something that. Yeah,
something to be aware of. But has that settled since?
It's settling, it's settling. But some other patients have also found then that the positive with a robot, it's there to plan your operation, and things are sent off and analysed by computers. And something that when I was at the London Hip meeting last year, and Justin Cobb, mentioned he was very much in favour of it, and our surgeon has done it for a while. So I thought it sounded very positive. But the ironic thing is our surgeon gets just as good results without the robot. So I always say to patients, if you've got a good surgeon, that's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think we're going to do some separate sessions more around sort of innovations in surgery and computer assisted and robotic assisted surgery. But really, yeah, you're absolutely right. The main thing is that you have an experienced surgeon who's good at what they're doing and who's comfortable, and they'll have a way of doing things that works for them. Yeah.